This is the result of years and years of issues that have not been dealt with, have not been healed at the major points in your life where you didn't have the right conditions to have the favorable outcome, you got the unfavorable outcome. And that has just been compounding over each stage of life, and it has set you up. And so it is so important to go back and not just deal with midlife crisis stuff, but to go back and deal with all of the things that made you vulnerable for a midlife crisis. What happens for many people when they go into this stage is they can look like they're succeeding. They can look like they're doing well. They can look happy for a while because they're self-absorbed. They're living for pleasure. They're living for advancing themselves. And that can look like it's the right recipe for life. But at some point, as they go along this journey, they get to a stage where they hit a crisis. You call it a midlife crisis, whatever, where all of a sudden there's cracks in the whole veneer of their life. Something isn't working, and they deep down begin to go, something's missing. All of this isn't leading to the happiness, the success, the joy that I thought it would. So self-absorption at first looks like it's going to lead to this wonderful life, but eventually it leads to a crisis. And people, if they don't have the safety and the tools from childhood, don't know that what they're missing is learning to love, learning to have that broader, I want to benefit others. They're lost. They don't know what to do to try and get through this crisis. So let me just read you a quote. It says, while not every midlife crisis is linked to complex trauma, it is a common trigger for midlife emotional turmoil. For individuals with complex trauma, midlife can act as a catalyst that forces long suppressed emotions to the surface, leading to a reckoning with their past. This can be a significant factor in what looks like a midlife crisis, blurring the lines between normative life transition and a trauma response. So let me just do a little aside here on what are some of the characteristics of a person having a midlife crisis. So let's start with emotional, mental characteristics. There's typically a growing dissatisfaction, a boredom that begins to happen. The current life isn't feeling fulfilling. The career isn't feeling fulfilling. Relationships aren't fulfilling. So there's that crisis that is happening in dissatisfaction and boredom. But then there's often a self-doubt and regret. So you begin to question the choices you've made. You begin to have a bit of a sense of failure, that you don't have anything of value to truly show for your life. Oh, you might have money and possessions, but nothing that really has made a significant impact. And then you look at some of the damage that you've done to relationships, to other people, and you have regrets over that as well. And then there's an anxiety and frustration, a sense of uncertainty about the future, restlessness. You're not sure what to do next. There's all these responsibilities and roles that you really don't feel like doing anymore, but you don't know what to do. So there's this frustration, restlessness that's there. And then many people go to mood changes. So there's no longer this happy-go-lucky, life is wonderful positivity. There's more and more anger that begins to happen. Irritability begins to happen. Times of sadness and depression. And then, like we said, anxiety. So the emotional world is starting to shift into a more negative place. And then some go to very much an existential crisis where they start to question the meaning of life. So they start thinking about death. They wonder what the purpose of life is, why am I here? All of that, morals, they begin to question and think about at a very deep level, maybe for the very first time. And then there's elements of nostalgia where they begin to idealize the past and they compare it to the current life. So their past was idyllic and wonderful. Their current life is sad. And they begin to think, if I could just get back to my past life and the conditions of that life, I'd be happy again. But it's all a fantasy. It's distorted. Then there's some characteristics about behavior. And so they tend to then want to go to impulsive decisions. So if I just bought a sports car, if I just bought a luxury condo in the Mediterranean, whatever, that would make me happen. So it's all of a sudden making these sudden big purchases or drastic changes in their appearance and where they want to move to, or getting involved in new social circles, or let's get a young girlfriend. And all of that somehow is going to bring back the passion and the joy and make life meaningful again. Others begin to withdraw from their friends, their family. They pull away from activities that they once enjoyed. And then others go through changes in sexual desire, from an increase or a decrease in sexual desire, thinking if the increase is all I need is more sex, then I'll be happy. So again, it's that impulsive limbic brain of the child looking for instant pleasure, looking for an instant fix to make me happy, to take away all of this negative feeling. And then for many, it's just they lose interest in life, so there's lack of productivity, lack of creativity. They just begin to have a change in habits where the stuff they used to do every day, they just don't feel like doing. They start doing stuff like just watching TV, more kind of mindless activities. And so all of a sudden they begin to see changes in their weight, changes in their sleep pattern. There might even be a neglect of some personal hygiene that can show up in some people. Others become hyper-focused on their appearance. So they now have to just look a certain way, dress a certain way. They got to be dressed to the nines, get a new hairstyle, always have everything looking really good. So their image becomes their focus. Others become very preoccupied with their own personal comfort, their status. They don't want any hassles in life. They want to be a bit better than everybody. They want to have more possessions than everybody. And so they become very much focused on, again, the image and the externals of their life. Some become just indifferent, almost jaded when it comes to world issues, to the younger generation coming up and the problems they're struggling with. Don't care. Not my monkeys, not my circus, not going to get involved. And there's a bitterness, a cynicism that begins to creep in to their whole mindset. They love to go on rants. They love to talk about the good old days. It just becomes very negative. So if that describes you, the question isn't, okay, I'm having a midlife crisis. It's why? What are the underlying things that have set me up? Because many people go through midlife and don't have a midlife crisis. Why am I struggling with this so much? So let me give you some stuff that would come out of complex trauma that sets a person up for a midlife crisis. So number one, think of a child that grows up with narcissistic parents, parents that are controlling, parents where dad is do it my way or the highway, authoritarian. It's all about what the parents want. The kids have to make sacrifices. The kids have to give up their needs, their wishes, become what their parents want. And so life kind of feels like being in jail. They're free servants. They're constantly having to fawn in order to please their parents. What they want, what they are, what their interests doesn't matter. So now, when they finally get to adult life free of their parents, they go, now I can do what I want. Now I can just live for my needs, my desires. And without realizing it, they become quite narcissistic. And they begin to think that the recipe for happiness is just indulge my desires, do whatever I want, don't care about anybody else, because that's what caused me pain. I just want to live for me. So they don't go to healthy self-care, they go to unhealthy self-indulgence. And that becomes their whole approach to life. Then part of that for some is that the parent-child role was reversed for them growing up. So their parents acted like the helpless children, and they had to take care of their parents' needs. They had to take care of their parents' emotions. They had to have an antenna that was tuned to their parents' mood so that they would constantly be taking care of their parents to keep their parents happy. And so they were the parents, never allowed to be children. And so now when they grow up, they go, oh, finally I'm free to do what I want. And they end up going down that same road of becoming narcissistic. And what they don't realize is that though they hated what their parents did with a narcissistic approach to life and how it wounded them, they end up becoming like their parents, not just becoming narcissistic, but adopting the recipe for happiness and success that the parents were living by, which is, if I just get my way, if I just can do whatever I want, if I can just indulge all my desires, then I'll be happy. And success is just having lots of money, a good image, lots of possessions, all the right people in my life. And they slide into that without even realizing it. And they build their life that way as well. Then there's another thing that can happen through all of this fawning is the child had to fawn in order to survive, take care of their parents. But in some cases, they got validated for that. In some cases, they were told they were the hero child, they are wonderful. And so they become people pleasers, perfectionists, hard workers, and they do well. And it looks like, wow, this is really working for me. And they pour themselves into their career. They pour themselves into maybe helping others, but it's really for their own image and their own sense of value, that I have value. I always have to be doing things and helping people. And what happens for many people is after a while, something empty begins to happen, or they start to burn themselves out. But that fawning drives them back into this lifestyle of doing everything in order to get a sense of value. Then beyond that, there's the psychological pieces, and that comes out of the previous one, the sense of value that they need to get by doing and being self-absorbed with career and getting ahead and their own happiness, comes out of a deep shame that complex trauma produced, that I'm not good enough, that in order for me to be acceptable and not rejected, I have to be something other than my authentic self. And so that shame drives them into this self-absorption, this getting ahead, this work type of mindset. Then what happens for most children in complex trauma is they never had that healthy connection or attachment. And so now, instead of connecting to people in healthy ways, they attach to a lifestyle, to work, to accomplishments, to possessions. Those become their major attachments and give them the feelings of attachment. And then for many, they've never had a sense of purpose. They weren't able to find out who they were. And so now they're driven in life to try to find a sense of purpose, and they try to find it through their career, through getting ahead. And so all of that then can lead to a crisis later on when they find out this isn't working. Then there's the whole stress biology effect that needs to be looked at that comes out of complex trauma. And that is, complex trauma changes your whole autonomic nervous system so that it's used to being in the sympathetic nervous system. Go, go, go. That is the normal. That feels right. That I'm comfortable with. Learning to relax, learning to go to my parasympathetic nervous system doesn't feel right. It feels lazy, it feels selfish. And so people tend to push themselves because it feels normal, to pursue this way of life because it feels right. Then they burn themselves out. Then they start having chronic illness issues, chronic fatigue issues, depression issues, and that can then lead to the crisis. And all of those things eventually take their toll. Eventually, years later, it catches up with them and they realize, I've built my life on stuff that is no longer working. My house of cards is beginning to crumble. I built on a faulty foundation. And that's what's happening with the midlife crisis. And that, as you can see, comes out of complex trauma in all kinds of different ways. So if this is describing you. What I hope you see is this isn't just a midlife crisis in the here and now. This is the result of years and years of issues that have not been dealt with, have not been healed at the major points in your life where you didn't have the right conditions to have the favorable outcome, you got the unfavorable outcome. And that has just been compounding over each stage of life, and it has set you up. And so it is so important to go back and not just deal with midlife crisis stuff, but to go back and deal with all of the things that made you vulnerable for a midlife crisis. And so again, I would really encourage you that what you don't need right now is some quick fix to a midlife crisis. What you need is a deep dive into your complex trauma, into all of the stages of development that were disrupted. And so a course like our Lift course would help you do that. Get therapy, get help to do that deep dive. Then once you begin to heal that, there needs to be a shift from this continued self-absorption to what should have happened at the midlife stage, to becoming more loving, more giving, helping out. And so there needs to be a shift that I want my life now, yes, to take care of my needs, yes, to do healthy self-care, but I want to also not just learn to love myself in a healthy way, but to learn to love others in a healthy way. So I want to find ways to help others, to create, to serve. And so that could mean volunteering. That could mean contributing to a cause. That could mean mentoring younger people. That could mean developing creativity, legacy projects. Begin to explore those type of opportunities. And what you will find is as you do that, it's going to trigger all kinds of different fears. It could trigger all kinds of past issues that could lead to greater growth. But as you grow, as you learn to love it in this broader way, it's going to lead to a deeper satisfaction, a deeper fulfillment and joy.